The fire had been dead for 300 years. No one living had seen it burn. No one remembered the color of its flame or the heat it gave. The histories recorded only this, that the first fire had been extinguished the night the silent throne was forged, and that its extinction was not mourned but celebrated. The fire had been wild, they said, ungovernable. It had chosen kings instead of crowning them, and in doing so, it had made the throne a servant to flame rather than law. So the ancient council had smothered it beneath stone and iron, and they had bound the throne in oaths instead, oaths that would hold forever, oaths that required no heart, no heat, no dangerous choosing. He had been taught, as all heirs before him, that emotion was the enemy of order, that attachment was the corruption of duty, and that the throne demanded not love but surrender. He had knelt before it at 16 and spoken the words that severed him from every bond he might have formed. He had placed the crown upon his own head because no hand was permitted to do it for him. He had reigned for 11 years without falter, without question, without warmth. His days were measured and judgments delivered, laws enforced, and silences maintained. His nights were spent alone in chambers so vast that his footsteps echoed against stone walls that had never known laughter or weeping, or any sound that might suggest a heart still beat within them. The gardens that had once bloomed with color had been trimmed into geometric perfection, every wild thing tamed, every unpredictable element removed. Even the sky above the palace seemed grayer, as though the sun itself had learned not to shine too brightly upon a kingdom that valued restraint above all else. Until the night she was brought into the hall of ash, she was not announced. She was not named. The guards who carried her in did so with the stiffness of men who did not understand their own orders, and when they set her down before the throne, they stepped back as though she might burn them. She did not look like a threat. It was a vibration in the stone, a tremor in the air, a stirring in the bones of the kingdom itself. The silent king felt it first in his chest, then in the crown upon his head, and finally in the throne beneath him. The throne which had never moved, which had never warmed, which had been cold iron and colder law for 300 years, began to pulse. He did not show his alarm. He had been trained too well for that. But his fingers tightened on the armrests, and his gaze sharpened on the woman kneeling below. Around him, the hall had gone silent in a different way. She was found in the ashen vale, my lord, alone, unmarked by any house. She carried no sigil, no name, no claim, but she was found standing in the center of the dead hearth, the place where the first fire had burned, the place where no living thing had set foot in 300 years because the ground itself was said to be cursed, because the ash there never settled, because those who ventured too close reported dreams of flame and voices calling names that had been forgotten before their grandparents were born. The silent king's jaw tightened. And she lives. She does, my lord. That is impossible. The dead hearth consumes all who enter. The texts are clear on this. The ground itself is poison, the air thick with remnants of the binding that extinguished the flame. No one has survived contact with it in living memory. The high keeper inclined his head. It was believed so. Yet she stands. A faint glow, like embers beneath skin, flickered at the hollow of her throat. It pulsed in time with the thrumming of the throne, and as he watched, it grew brighter, spreading in thin veins of light across her collarbone, down toward her heart. He rose. The movement was slow, deliberate, and it silenced the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the hall. When the silent king stood, the kingdom held its breath. No defiance either, only a stillness that mirrored his own, and beneath it something older, something that recognized him not as a king but as something else, something the throne had no name for. The throne behind him roared to life. It was not metaphor, it was not imagined. Flame erupted from the base of the silent throne, white and gold and blinding, and it climbed the iron in spirals, wrapping the seat in light that had not existed for 3 centuries. The hall filled with heat. The tapestries on the walls rippled, as though caught in a wind that came from nowhere, others raising their hands to shield their faces from the sudden brilliance. The high keeper fell forward, catching himself on his staff, his mouth open in shock, but the silent king did not move. He stood before her, his shadow swallowed by firelight, and he felt the oaths that had bound him since boyhood began to crack. Not all at once, not violently, but like ice on a river at the end of winter, fracturing in thin lines that spread and deepened with every breath he took. He felt them breaking, and he felt, beneath the breaking, something he had not felt in 11 years, something that had no place in a king, something the throne had been built to deny. He felt, she whispered, and though her voice was soft, it filled the hall like the tolling of a bell. I did not mean to wake it. Then why did you go there? His words were sharp, but his tone was not. It was something worse. It was shaken. I was called. By what? My lord, she must be taken to the sanctum, she must be examined. If she has awakened the first fire, if she carries the old blood, if she is marked by the flame, then the throne has chosen, the silent king said quietly. The council members who had gathered at the edges whispered frantically to one another. It is not chosen in 300 years. The oaths prevent it. The law forbids it. My lord, you know this. You spoke the words yourself when you took the crown. You bound yourself to law and law alone. The oaths, the king said, his gaze still locked on the woman, on Sarah, though he did not yet know her name, were made to prevent this, and they have failed. He turned and walked back to the throne. The fire did not burn him. His arms, his crown, and when he sat, it settled into the iron like a living thing returning home. The light dimmed but did not fade, and for the first time in living memory, the hall felt warm. He looked down at her from his seat of flame and law, and his voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a king who had just lost his kingdom, and did not yet know what he had gained in its place. What is your name? She hesitated. You will tell me why the fire knows you. I do not know, my lord. You will tell me why you were in the dead hearth. It was steady, clear, and beneath it was a sorrow so deep he felt it in his own chest. A way to stop burning. The throne flared, and the silent king felt something inside him answer it. A recognition. A pull. A certainty that terrified him because it had no basis in law or logic or anything he had been taught to trust. He understood then, in a way that no law or training had prepared him for, that she was not an intruder. She was not a threat. She was the answer to a question the throne had been asking for 300 years, and he had been ruling in the silence of that unanswered call. My lord, the law forbids contact with one who bears the mark of the forbidden flame. She must be examined, tested, her bloodline traced before any decision can be made regarding her fate. The protocols are clear. The law, the king said, his tone cold and final, was written when the fire was dead. Remove her bonds. The guards hesitated, their eyes darting between the king and the high keeper, between duty and tradition, between the law they had always known and the fire that had rewritten everything in the span of a single breath. Then slowly they obeyed. The iron fell from her wrists with a heavy clang that echoed through the silent hall, and she stood slowly, rubbing the raw skin where the metal had bitten deep enough to leave marks that would scar. She did not bow. She did not thank him. She only looked at him with those smoke-gray eyes, and he felt the heat in the throne respond to her gaze, rising and falling like breath, like a heartbeat, like something alive. "You will remain in the palace," he said. "You will be housed in the East Tower. You will speak to no one but me. You will not attempt to contact anyone outside these walls. Do you understand? And if I refuse, then the fire will consume you where you stand." It was not a threat. It was truth, and they both knew it. He could see it in the way the glow at her throat pulsed with every breath she took, in the way the light spread a little further across her skin each time the throne flared. She nodded once, a small, deliberate motion, and the guards led her away. She nodded once, a small, deliberate motion, and the guards led her away. The weight of something other than duty. He felt want. Food was brought to her 3 times a day by servants who would not meet her eyes. Water was left in pitchers by her bedside. Clean clothes appeared in her wardrobe, all of them gray or white, the colors of ash and smoke, but no one spoke to her. The servants who attended her moved with the fearful efficiency of those who did not wish to be seen. It did not hurt. That was the strangest part. It should have hurt, she thought, but instead it felt like recognition, like something that had always been there and had only now been named, like waking from a long sleep to find that the world had continued without her, and she was only now catching up. At night she dreamed of the throne. She saw it in the dark, burning with white gold flame, and she saw the silent king sitting upon it, his face carved from stone, his eyes the only living thing in a hall of shadows. In the dream he called her name, and when she walked toward him, the fire rose to meet her. She reached for him, and he reached for her, and the moment their hands touched, the fire exploded outward, consuming the hall, the palace, the kingdom, until there was nothing left but the two of them and the light. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, slow and deliberate, and she knew without seeing that it was him. He simply opened the door and stood in the threshold, the crown upon his head, catching the last light of the setting sun and throwing it back in sharp, cold points. She was standing by the window. She did not turn. "You have not eaten," he said. "I am not hungry. You have not slept. I have dreamed." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The sound of it was final, like the closing of a tomb. He crossed the room slowly, and when he stopped, he was close enough that she could feel the cold that clung to him, the frost of oaths and law and years without warmth. But beneath it, faint and growing stronger, she felt something else. Heat. Not the heat of the fire, but the heat of a man who had been taught to be cold and was only now remembering what it meant to burn. "What do you dream?" he asked. She turned then and looked at him fully. Up close, she could see the lines of strain around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides as though he were holding himself in place by force of will alone. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes flickered. A spark, a recognition. The throne dreams of you as well. How do you know? Because it burns when you are near. Because it has not burned in 300 years. Because I have sat upon it every day of my reign, and I have never felt it move, never felt it warm, never felt it respond to anything I did or said or thought. And now it sings when you breathe. It flares when your heart beats. It knows you in a way it has never known me. She looked away out the window toward the vale. The sun was setting, painting the ash-covered fields in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment the dead land looked almost beautiful. I did not ask for this. Neither did I. There was a long silence. Then she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "What does it want?" I do not know. At the ruins of the dead hearth in the distance, at the place where the fire had slept for 3 centuries and was now impossibly awake, but I know what it is doing. What? It is undoing me. Vulnerability. Raw and unguarded and terrible. They severed every attachment, every bond. They made me incapable of desire, of longing, of anything that might compromise the law. I have watched people weep before me and felt nothing. And now he stopped, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists. Now I feel everything, her breath caught, because of me, because of the fire, because of what you carry, because the throne has chosen, and it has chosen you, and I do not know what that means. But I know that every moment you are here, the oaths break a little more. Every time I see you, every time I hear your voice, every time I feel the fire respond to you, I feel myself becoming something other than what I was. And I do not know if I can stop it. I do not know if I want to. She stepped back, shaking her head. I am no one. I have no name, no house, no claim. I should not have woken the fire. I should not. And yet you are here. He turned to face her fully, and the weight of his gaze was unbearable, like standing before a judge who could see every secret, every lie, every hidden truth. And the throne burns for you, not for the council, not for the law, not for me, for you. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw something that made her chest tighten, that made the fire in her throat flare so bright she had to press her hand against it to keep from gasping. You should not be here, she said, her voice shaking. If the council finds out, the council already knows. They know I came to you the night you arrived. They know I ordered you kept in the tower instead of the dungeons. They know the throne burns, and they know I have not been able to sit upon it for more than a few moments at a time without feeling like I am being torn apart. They are afraid, Sarah, and when men are afraid, they do dangerous things. Then send me away, send me back to the dead hearth. Let the fire take me, and you can go back to the way things were. I cannot. Why not? Why not? He reached out, hesitant, and touched her hand. The contact was brief, barely a brush of skin against skin, but the fire leapt between them, bright and fierce and undeniable, a current of heat that ran from her hand to his and back again, building with each pulse until it felt like they were both going to combust. And she saw in them the same thing she felt in her chest. Recognition, connection. Something that had no name in any language the kingdom spoke, but that was older than words, older than law, older than the throne itself. Because, he said, his voice rough, I do not want to go back to the way things were. The words hung between them, heavy and true and irrevocable. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were full of tears. What happens to us? I do not know. His voice was quiet, almost broken. But I know what will happen if we do nothing. The fire will grow, the oaths will break, and one day the throne will demand a choice. And I do not know if I will be strong enough to make it. What choice? Between you and the kingdom. She understood then. She understood that he was not just a king. No. I will go back to the dead hearth. I will return the fire. I will know. His voice was hard, final, and it silenced her. Finally he said, "There may be another way." What way? The archives, the old histories. If we can find those records. She reached out and took his hand, and this time when the fire leapt between them, neither of them pulled away. They stood there in the fading light, their hands joined, the heat building between them until the air itself seemed to shimmer, and they made a silent promise that they would find a way, that they would face the fire together, that they would not let the law or the council or the weight of 300 years of silence decide their fate. When he left, the room felt colder, emptier, and Sarah stood by the window watching the last light fade from the sky, feeling the fire in her chest burn brighter with every breath. The council convened in secret the following morning. The high keeper stood at the head of the table in the chamber of stone, a windowless room deep beneath the palace, where the oldest laws were carved into walls that had stood for 1,000 years. The carvings depicted scenes from the founding of the kingdom, from the days when the throne was new and the fire still burned. They showed kings kneeling before flame, kings crowned in light, kings consumed when they were found unworthy. And at the very center of the largest wall, half hidden by shadow, was a carving that no one spoke of, that most had forgotten existed. It showed two figures standing in fire, their hands joined, their faces turned toward each other, and above them a throne burning so bright it seemed to be made of light itself, all of them keepers of tradition and enforcers of the law that had governed the kingdom since the fire was extinguished. They were silent as he spoke, their faces grave, their hands folded on the table in front of them. "The first fire burns," the high keeper said, his voice measured but unable to hide the tremor beneath. "You have all seen it. You have all felt the heat in the hall of ash. The throne, which has been cold for 300 years, is awake, and the king is compromised." Silence. The seals were set with the blood of 12 kings. The fire was bound beneath stone and iron and oaths that could not be broken. What has happened should not be possible. "And yet it has happened," the high keeper said. "Then she must be removed, executed, if necessary. The fire cannot choose if there is no one for it to choose. He has." He paused, and the weight of what he was about to say seemed to press down on him like a physical thing. "He has visited her, alone, in her chambers, at night." Voices rose in shock and anger, hands slammed on the table, chairs scraped back as council members stood, their faces flushed with fury or pale with fear. "We cannot allow this. What do you propose?" the high keeper asked, though he already knew the answer. He had known it from the moment the fire had ignited, from the moment he had seen the look in the silent king's eyes when he gazed at the woman. Mirith leaned forward, her eyes glinting in the dim light of the chamber. "The fire burns because she is near the throne. If she were to go to the source, to the dead hearth itself, the fire would have what it wants. It would consume her or crown her, and either way the matter would be settled. And if it crowns her, it will not. She has no training, no lineage, no claim. The fire may have woken for her, but it will not choose her. It will test her, and she will fail, and she will burn. And when she is gone, the fire will return to the earth, and the throne will grow cold again, and the king will remember his duty. The high keeper was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "And if the king refuses to let her go? Then we give her a reason to go herself, that the only way to stop it, the only way to save herself and the king, is to return to the dead hearth and release the fire back to its source. And if she does not believe us, she will, because it is not entirely a lie, and it was not. The fire was growing. Sirrah could feel it. Each day it burned hotter, brighter, more insistent. It filled her lungs when she breathed, her veins when her heart beat, her bones when she moved. At night she could see the glow beneath her skin spreading like roots, like vines of light that wrapped around her heart and ribs and would not let go. She woke gasping, her chest tight, her hands pressed to her sternum, as though she could hold the fire inside, as though she could keep it from consuming her entirely. She tried to hide it. She wore high-necked gowns that covered her throat. She kept her sleeves long. She did not look in mirrors because when she did, she saw a stranger staring back, a woman made of light and ash, a woman who was no longer entirely human. She did not tell the king, but he knew. He saw it in the way she moved, slower now, as though the weight of the fire was dragging her down, as though every step took more effort than it should. Her eyes distant, her face pale. He saw it and he could do nothing, because every time he sat upon the throne, every time he tried to govern as he once had, he felt them snapping one by one, like threads pulled too tight, and with each one that broke, he felt something else rise to take its place, longing, fear, a desperate, aching need to protect her, to keep her close, to defy every law and tradition and council member who dared to suggest she should be harmed. He could not eat. He could not sleep. The archives were buried deep beneath the palace, in chambers so old that even the stones had forgotten their purpose. Dust hung thick in the air, and the shelves were lined with scrolls and books that had not been touched in centuries, their spines cracked, their pages yellowed and brittle. The silent king walked through them with a lantern in his hand, searching for something he did not know how to name, something that would tell him how to save her, how to save himself, how to save the kingdom from the fire that was consuming them all. He found it in a book bound in blackened leather, its pages so old they threatened to crumble at his touch. The title was written in a script so ancient he could barely read it, but he understood enough. The First Fire, a history of choosing. Before the oaths were written, before the law ruled the kingdom with an iron fist, they spoke of a fire that had lived in the heart of the earth, a fire that chose kings not by blood or lineage, but by the strength of their spirit, the purity of their intent, the depth of their capacity to love. Love, the word appeared again and again, circled in faded ink, as though someone long ago had tried to understand it, even his own life to protect those he cared for. And so the fire tested them. It looked into their hearts and saw what they valued most, what they feared most, what they would sacrifice everything to protect. And if they were willing to burn, If they were willing to give themselves completely, the fire accepted them. It crowned them in flame, and they ruled with the strength of love, and the kingdom prospered. But the council had feared it, a thing that could be predicted and controlled and passed down through bloodlines without risk. And the kingdom had survived, but it had not prospered. It had grown cold, hard, silent. It had forgotten what it meant to love, and in forgetting, it had forgotten what it meant to live. Of two souls who recognized each other across time and distance and every barrier the world could place between them, the fire did not choose one to rule and one to serve. It chose two who would rule together, two who would burn together, two who would give everything for each other and for the kingdom they loved. And then he found the passage that made his blood run cold. When the fire chooses two, it read, it demands that both face the flame. One cannot be crowned without the other. One cannot burn without the other. To separate them is to deny the fire what it seeks, and a denied fire will consume everything in its search for completion. The bond once formed cannot be broken by law or distance or death. It can only be severed by choice, and such a choice will destroy not only the bond, but those who made it. He understood now. The fire had not chosen Sarah to destroy the kingdom. It had chosen her to save it, to remind the throne of what it had lost. It wanted him to choose, to decide whether he would rule by law or by love, whether he would hold to the oaths that were breaking or embrace the bond that was forming, whether he would be the silent king, cold and distant and alone, or whether he would be something else, something the kingdom had not seen in 300 years, a king who loved. He left the archives and went straight to the East Tower, his heart pounding, his mind racing, the book still clutched in his hand. She was sitting by the window when he entered, her face pale, her eyes distant. She turned when she heard him, and when she saw his face, she stood. "What is it?" she asked. He crossed the room and took her hands in his, and he told her everything. He told her about the book, about the fire, about the way it chose kings by their capacity to love. He told her that the fire was not killing her in the way they would claim. If the fire wants to test us, it will test us together. If it wants to choose, it will choose us both. And if it wants us to burn, then we will burn together. I would give up everything for you. The throne, the crown, the kingdom, my life, all of it. Because I love you, Sarah. Cannot understand the hearts of those he governs. And I will not lose you to save a throne that was built on lies. She kissed him then, and the fire surged between them, wild and bright and all-consuming, wrapping them in light that filled the room, that spilled out the windows, that lit up the entire East Tower like a beacon. He kissed her back, his hands tangled in her hair, his heart pounding in rhythm with hers, and for the first time in his life he felt whole. When they broke apart, he said quietly, "We leave at dawn. We go to the dead hearth together. We face the fire together, and we let it choose." She nodded, her eyes bright with tears and determination. They left the palace in the hour before sunrise, when the sky was still dark and the kingdom slept. The silent king wore no crown, no cloak, no symbol of his station. The guards at the gates did not stop them. They watched in silence as their king walked past, and when he was gone, they looked at each other with fear and wonder, and did not know what to do. He summoned the council, and they rode after them. By the time they reached the edge of the dead hearth, the fire had already risen. So bright it hurt to look at, so hot the air itself seemed to ripple and warp. And at its center stood the silent king and Sarah, their hands joined, their faces turned toward the light, their bodies outlined in fire. And then, slowly, the fire began to change. It split, dividing into two flames, one for each of them. The flame around the silent king was different. The fire looked into his heart and saw his fear of losing her, his fear of failing his kingdom, his fear that love would make him weak, that it would compromise his judgment, that it would destroy everything he had worked for. And it demanded that he face that fear, that he choose between the safety of law and the risk of love, that he decide once and for all what kind of king he would be. And he chose. He held Sarah's hand, and he let the fire see everything. His fear, yes, but also his longing, his years of silence and the ache that had lived beneath it, his desire to protect her, to keep her, to burn for her, if that was what it demanded. A law without compassion was just cruelty with a different name. And a kingdom that demanded its rulers surrender their humanity was not a kingdom worth ruling. The fire, reading the truth in his heart, accepted him. It poured into him, not consuming, but crowning, burning away the oaths that had bound him and replacing them with something new. Not to duty divorced from feeling, but to a deeper duty, one that honored both the kingdom and the heart that ruled it. When the fire faded, they stood together in the center of the dead hearth, their hands still joined, their bodies glowing with the remnants of flame. The ground beneath them, which had been ash and death for 3 centuries, began to change. Green shoots pushed through the gray, small and fragile at first, then stronger. Flowers bloomed where nothing had grown in living memory. The dead hearth, which had been a scar on the land, began to heal, and the throne, miles away in the hall of ash, burned brighter than it ever had, a steady, constant flame that would never go cold again. The council stared in shock and awe as the silent king turned to face them, Sarah at his side, both of them crowned in light. "The fire has chosen," he said, his voice carrying across the distance. "Not one, but 2. Not law alone, but love. The throne will no longer be cold. The oaths will no longer demand silence. And the kingdom will remember what it means to live." The High Keeper stepped forward, his face pale, his voice shaking. "My lord, the law will change," the king said. "It was written by those who feared love, who believed that feeling was the enemy of order. But they were wrong. A kingdom ruled by fear is not strong, it is brittle, and it breaks the moment something challenges it. We will write new laws, laws that honor both duty and compassion, laws that allow rulers to be human. And if the council cannot accept that, then the council will be replaced." Meredith stepped forward, her face hard. "You would tear down 300 years of tradition for her?" "No," the king said quietly. "I would build something better, for her, for the kingdom, for everyone who has lived in silence for too long." He turned back to Sarah, and together they walked away from the dead hearth, away from the council, toward the palace that would become something new. And the kingdom, watching them, began to hope. The years that followed were not easy. There was resistance. There were those who clung to the old ways, who believed that the silent king had betrayed everything the throne stood for. There were attempts to undermine his rule, to separate him from Sarah, to return the kingdom to the cold law it had known. But the fire burned in the hall of ash, constant and warm, and it reminded the kingdom of what they had chosen. Love over fear, courage over control, a throne that served the people instead of demanding they serve it. Slowly, the kingdom changed. The laws were rewritten, not to abandon duty, but to honor the humanity of those who ruled. Kings and queens were no longer forbidden to love. They were encouraged to marry, to form bonds, to rule with both wisdom and compassion. The oaths were simplified. Their focus shifted from severance to service. The people who had lived for generations under the weight of silence began to speak, to laugh, to weep openly when they grieved. The palace, which had been a tomb, became a home. Gardens bloomed where only stone had been. Music filled halls that had known only echoes. And at the center of it all, the silent king and Sarah ruled together, their bond a living reminder that the strongest kingdoms were not built on law alone, but on the courage to love even when the world demanded otherwise. They had children, 3 of them. Each one taught that the throne was not a prison, but a privilege. That power was not the absence of feeling, but the strength to feel deeply and still choose wisely. And when they grew old, when their hair turned silver and their steps grew slow, they returned to the dead hearth one final time. The council, now filled with younger voices who had grown up in the warmth of their rule, watched as they walked hand in hand into the place where it had all begun. The fire rose to meet them, gentle now, welcoming. It wrapped around them like old friends reuniting, and they stood in its light, their faces peaceful, their hands joined. "Are you afraid?" Sarah asked. "No," the king said, "not any more." The fire took them gently, as it had always promised to do, and when it faded, they were gone. But the throne did not go dark. It burned still, steady and warm, waiting for the next who would be brave enough to love, to choose, to let the fire test them and find them worthy. And in the kingdom that had once been silent, the people told stories of the king who had broken his oaths for love, and the woman who had awakened a fire that would never die. They told stories of courage and compassion, of duty balanced with devotion, of a throne that had learned to burn with warmth instead of cold. And they remembered, because some fires once lit can never be extinguished. Some bonds, once formed, can never be broken. And some loves are strong enough to change the world. This has been a story of fire and silence, of oaths broken and thrones transformed, of a bond that defied law and a love that rewrote destiny. If this tale stirred something in you, if you felt the heat of the first fire or the courage it took for the silent king to choose love over duty, I invite you to share your thoughts below. What do you believe the fire truly wanted? Was it right to rewrite the laws, or should the old ways have been preserved? Could a kingdom truly thrive when ruled by love instead of law alone? Your interpretations give these stories life, and I would be honored to hear them. If you enjoyed this journey into the world of the silent bond, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, so you may return when the fire calls again, when another story unfolds, and when love perhaps crowns another who dares to burn.